God's chosen on, heaven is ready to empower you, but you must say yes. There comes a moment when silence doesn't just echo, it beckons. You weren't scrolling, you were being summoned. This isn't motivation. This is a divine encounter wrapped in earthly disguise. Somewhere deep in your chest, you've felt it. That quiet ache that refused to leave. That invisible weight that made you ask, God, was I forgotten? But what if I told you, you weren't forgotten? You were being formed, and the help you've been praying for? It's already on its way. The world may have overlooked you, but heaven has been orchestrating your name into rooms you didn't even know existed. This is your confirmation. If you are God's chosen one, this message was written in heaven with your name on it, the H that led you here. There's a weight you can't explain, not heavy like grief, not sharp like heartbreak, but deep, quiet, like a buried drumbeat echoing through your soul. It's the ache of a calling that hasn't fully awakened, the whisper of something more. Even when life looks fine on the outside, you've shown up every day. You've prayed the silent prayers. You've held your breath when others celebrated their open doors. And you stood, still locked out, wondering, did I miss it? The milestones passed. The timelines dissolved. Birthdays came and went like gentle reminders of everything still undone. You fasted, hoping to accelerate what heaven seemed to delay. You cried into your pillow at 2 a.m. and asked the question no one else heard. God, did I do something wrong? Or is this just how being chosen feels? Let me answer that for you. You didn't miss it. You didn't fail the test. You were being positioned for something bigger than even your boldest prayers. In a quiet town where nothing ever seemed to shift, heaven was moving in silence. You thought you were stuck, but God was anchoring you, so that when the winds changed, you wouldn't be blown away by your own blessing. And now the shift has begun. You can feel it before you see it. You can sense it before the email comes, before the name is mentioned, before the door swings open. It's already happening. But it's not random. It's not hype. It's holy. And it's right on time. Because when you belong to God, help doesn't come late. It comes appointed. This is the moment your spirit has been waiting for. And if you've been asking for a sign, this is it. Part 1. Buried, but not forgotten. There were no fireworks the day she broke. No loud moment. No dramatic fall. Just a slow, sacred silence that settled over her life like dust on a windowsill. She sat in her tiny kitchen in rural Tennessee, sunlight stretching through slanted blinds, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. She hadn't spoken to anyone in days, not because she didn't want to, but because she no longer had the strength to explain a silence that even she didn't understand. Jobs had passed her over. Relationships had dried up. Dreams that once fluttered wildly in her chest now sat dormant, like seeds buried too deep to bloom. God, she whispered, not expecting a reply. Why does it feel like nothing is moving? But something was, just not where she could see it. She didn't know that heaven was busy behind the veil, that while she mourned the years she thought she lost, God was multiplying what she couldn't measure. Because in the kingdom, waiting, it's working. And buried doesn't mean forgotten. In fact, it was the burial that saved her. Her old journal tells the story, pages wrinkled with tear-stained ink. One entry reads, I don't know if I'm in a valley or a grave, but I can't feel the light. What she didn't realize was, she was in a grave, but not for death, for rebirth. Because chosen ones aren't grown on platforms. They're grown in soil, dark, silent, sacred soil. Unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains a single seed, but if it dies, it produces many. John 12:24. She wasn't being punished. She was being planted. There were people who ran past her, seemingly thriving, hosting highlights, celebrating breakthroughs. And part of her wanted to run too. the sprint toward the stage, toward visibility, toward applause. But God had a different agenda. He needed her to grow roots, because the weight of what was coming would require something storms couldn't shake. And so he hid her, covered her, preserved her in obscurity, not because she was weak, but because she was destined to last. Think of Joseph, heaven whispered, betrayed, imprisoned, forgotten. It wasn't delay, it was development, refinement without revenge, purity without pride. And now the soil was breaking, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. She could feel something shifting in her spirit, a gentle pressing against the walls of the old. The ache was still there, but now it was joined by a spark, tiny, trembling, but undeniably alive. What she didn't know yet was that someone had already seen her, that a name, her name, had been whispered in a conversation far away, that someone was already moving, already waking up with a divine burden to help her. But before the help would arrive, God needed her to remember. She may have been buried, but she was never, ever forgotten. Part 2, invisible but watched. Nobody clapped when she showed up. Not at the prayer meeting, not at the job she stayed faithful to long after the promotion went to someone else. Not even at the small women's group where her words, always quiet, always careful, seemed to float past ears too distracted to catch truth when it came without volume. She was used to it, used to pouring out without being refilled, used to sitting in rooms where she gave what she needed but didn't get. But what she didn't realize was that she was being watched, not by critics, not by crowds, but by someone assigned. It started months ago. A stranger stumbled across her blog, a short post, just 600 words written after midnight when she couldn't sleep. No hashtags, no hype, just honesty. And somehow it lingered. The words wouldn't leave the stranger's heart. A man in leadership, influential, connected. He read it once, then again, and again. And though he never commented, never liked, never messaged, he remembered her name. She had no idea, no clue that while she cried in secret, someone was observing her strength. He watched how she didn't flinch in crisis, how she moved with quiet integrity in a world that rewards performance, how she carried herself like she'd already been validated, because she had, not by people, but by God. Your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Matthew 6:6. Heaven doesn't miss what the world ignores. Think of Esther, hidden in the palace, unannounced, unadvertised, uncelebrated, until the appointed moment arrived. Her rise wasn't for applause, it was for assignment. And just like Esther, the chosen one in this story had been tucked away, not as punishment, but as preparation. God had whispered her name into a heart that mattered, a heart with access, with reach, with the ability to unlock doors her resume never would. And that heart, it was already stirring. She still doesn't know, still shows up at work early, still prays quietly in her car before walking in, still serves behind the scenes with no recognition, no fanfare, no feedback. But every act is a signal, every silent yes. Every time she chose integrity over image. Every moment she gave without expectation. Heaven took note, and someone else did too. They're not watching to admire, they're watching to act, to step into her story with purpose, to align with what God already ordained. She doesn't see it yet, but the one who holds keys is already holding her name. So she keeps going, keeps being faithful, keeps loving without applause, because she's not doing it for attention. She's doing it out of obedience. And soon the silence that shaped her will break with the sound of a divine door opening, because she was never invisible. She was observed by heaven and by the one heaven sent. Part 3. Your resume is oil. It was supposed to be a big moment. She had spent all week editing her resume, fixing typos, polishing bullet points, practicing her pitch. She even fasted the day before, hoping for favor. But as she walked into the tall glass building, something shifted. The receptionist wouldn't look her in the eye. The interview was rushed. They barely skimmed her credentials before offering a hollow, "We'll be in touch." She never heard back. She sat in her car afterward, shoulders stiff, heart heavy. She glanced at her resume, still warm from the printer, and whispered under her breath, "God, why does this never work?" That's when he spoke. Not audibly, but undeniably. "Because I don't hire based on paper. I anoint based on oil. Heaven never asked for credentials. God never needed a diploma to release destiny. He chooses based on availability, not accolades." She remembered Gideon, hiding in fear, unqualified by every human standard. Yet the angel called him. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior," Judges 6:12. Not once you're strong, not if you succeed, but right now, in the hiding, in the trembling, in the not enoughness. She clutched the paper in her hand. It didn't tell her story. It didn't show the nights she stayed up praying for a vision she couldn't see. It didn't show the way she fed others while her own soul was starving. It didn't show the battles she fought behind closed doors and won without applause. But God saw it all. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. 1 Samuel 16:7. What she carried wasn't printed. It was poured. The oil on her life was costly. It came from rejection, from loneliness, from years of being overlooked, misunderstood, and mislabeled. But every drop was precious. It couldn't be fabricated. It couldn't be taught. It had to be lived. And that's what made it powerful. She had walked through fire and came out not smelling like smoke, but carrying fragrance. The kind that marks you, and the kind that lingers when you leave the room. There was a divine connector out there. Someone heaven had already whispered to. They weren't looking for a resume. They were looking for the real thing. Their authenticity, presence. And when they crossed her path, through a post, a prayer, a providential meeting, they would know that's the one, not because of what's on her paper, but because of what's in her spirit. So she tossed the resume on the passenger seat, wiped her tears, and drove home in silence. But this time, not defeated. This time, aware God didn't need her to prove herself. He just needed her to carry the oil. And the right doors? They would open not because she knocked loudest, but because heaven sent someone with a key. Part 4. Help comes like lightning. She had just finished folding the last of the laundry when it happened. No thunder, no warning, just a notification, a name she didn't recognize, a message she didn't expect. "Hi, I came across something you shared months ago, and I can't explain it, but I believe you're the answer to something I've been praying about." She stared at the screen. Was this real? She didn't feel like an answer. She barely felt like she was holding on. But as she reread those words, something broke in the atmosphere. Not with noise, but with weight. The help had come. She didn't know this person had been stirred in prayer. She didn't know they sat in boardrooms, navigated influence, carried access to spaces she thought were locked forever. And yet, God whispered her name to them, a name she once wished she could change. A name associated with silence, with delays, with almosts. But now, that name had been hand-delivered by heaven. "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it?" Isaiah 43:19. God doesn't always move gradually. Sometimes he moves suddenly, like with Peter in Acts 12. Chained between guards, stuck between impossibility and prayer. Then suddenly an angel appeared. Chains fell, doors opened, and Peter walked out, free, without a single guard waking. No build-up, no explanation, just divine execution. And now It was her turn. The moment didn't look like she imagined. There was no choir, no spotlight, just a message, a conversation, a shift. She remembered the night she begged God to move, the days she asked for a sign that heaven still saw her, and now help had arrived, not crawling in on hope, but crashing in like lightning, precise, powerful, universal, undeniable. She read the message again. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with holy recognition. This was the moment the waiting had been preparing her for, the one her spirit had been sensing even when logic rolled its eyes. She didn't need more confirmations. She didn't need another sign. The timing was God's. The connection was divine. And help was already here. But now came the real test. Would she move? Would she respond to the knock? Or stand frozen, still wearing the wounds of yesterday's delays? Heaven wasn't just opening a door. Heaven was requiring a step. Because lightning doesn't strike to entertain. It strikes to illuminate. And what she saw now, her name, lit up in the spirit. But forgotten, foretold, part 5. Sent to strengthen, not to silence. They met in the most unexpected place. Not a pool, not a conference, not even in a prayer group. It was a quiet lunch invitation, an afterthought to someone else's meeting. She almost didn't go. Something in her resisted, not because she was too busy, but because a part of her had grown weary of almosts, of moments that looked promising but left her emptier than before. But the Spirit whispered, "Go." And so she did, quietly, cautiously. He was already seated when she walked in. Not flashy, not loud. In fact, he looked ordinary. Until he looked up. And then she saw it. Recognition. Not the kind that says, "I know you," but the kind that says, "I've been looking for you, and I didn't even know it." He stood to greet her, and in that moment the room shifted. Not because of him, but because of what God had already deposited in him for her. He didn't come with a resume in hand. He didn't lead with his network, his titles, or his accomplishments. He led with humility, with presence, with honor, and that's how she knew this wasn't a pitch. It wasn't a manipulation masked as mentorship. It was a divine assignment. They are not coming to control you. They are being sent to confirm you. She had been through the counterfeits. People who saw her light and tried to dim it. People who masked competition as collaboration. Men who mistook her anointing for ambition and tried to manage her calling like it was theirs to control. But not this time. This time God was sending someone who carried the maturity to support, not suppress. Someone whose power wasn't a weapon, but a platform to lift others higher. She watched him as he spoke. He didn't talk at her. He listened, asked about her journey, not just where she was going, but what she had survived. And when she shared part of her story, the silence, the sowing, the years in the shadows, he didn't flinch. He didn't minimize. He nodded and his eyes welled up. "God hid you," he said gently. "Not because you were fragile, but because you were holy." She exhaled. A breath she didn't know she'd been holding for years. "You bring the oil, I'll bring the vessel." She had heard a version of that line before, but always from people who wanted her gift without the cost she paid to carry it. But this time was different. He wasn't there to take. He was there to build. He didn't see her as a charity case or a spiritual project. He saw her as an equal, a warrior forged in silence, seasoned in sorrow, and now ready to be seen, not for applause, but for assignment. God had prepared him long before this moment. Boardrooms she'd never entered, he'd sat in them. Rooms she prayed to reach, he had keys. Voices she'd only dreamed of influencing. He could pick up the phone and make a call. But here's the miracle. He didn't see his power as the main story. He saw it as a tool to advance hers. Like Mordecai with Esther, Like Barnabas with Paul. "You don't need to prove anything to me," he said. "Your presence is confirmation. I recognize the oil." She wept, not out loud, but deep within, because for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to shrink. So many before had tried to rewrite her, soften her, silence her strength, tell her that her discernment was too much, her presence too intimidating, her dreams too bold. But this man, this divine connection, saw her fire and didn't flinch. He honored it. "You've been prepared for this," he said, "and my only assignment is to make sure nothing stops what God started in you." That was the moment she knew. This wasn't a detour. It was a divine deliverance. But don't misunderstand. This wasn't about romance. This wasn't about elevation for vanity's sake. This was about purpose. The kind that moves nations. The kind that shifts families. The kind that multiplies legacies. She looked back over her shoulder, at the girl who begged God for one open door, at the woman who stayed silent when her name was misused, the intercessor who carried everyone else's burdens but never asked for help. And she whispered to that version of herself, "Help is here now, and it doesn't want to change you. It came to remind you. You were right all along. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." Galatians 6:2. Heaven doesn't send heroes. It sends helpers. People whose success was never about spotlight, but about stewardship. The person God assigned to her wasn't coming to save her. He was coming to amplify what God had already awakened. He didn't ask for the mic. He offered her one. That's how divine partnerships move. Without ego, without competition, without needing to be seen. He didn't need to be the sun. He just wanted to reflect the light already rising in her. And she stopped apologizing for her power, because now she knew it wasn't too much. It was matched. You see, chosen one, when the real help comes, it won't feel like pressure. It will feel like permission to rise, to speak, to stop explaining and just be. And when you step into that room, you won't wonder if you belong. You'll know you were carried there by grace and met by someone God sent ahead to open the door. Part 6. You still have to walk through the door. The email sat unopened. There it was, confirmation in black and white. An offer, a breakthrough, an open door. No strings, no delay, no denial. And yet, she didn't open it. Not right away. She sat on the edge of her bed, laptop humming, heart thundering. Not with fear, but with something deeper. A holy pause. Because for all the praying she'd done to get to this moment, the step in front of her still required something she hadn't expected. A yes in motion. She remembered every no that came before. The rooms she was disqualified from. The circles where her name was never mentioned. The doors that stayed shut no matter how hard she knocked. And now, here it was. A door not just unlocked, but wide open. And still, she hesitated. Because even divine opportunities don't carry you across the threshold. You still have to walk through. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Joshua 1:9. Favor had brought her to the edge, but only obedience could take her through. This was the moment she'd fasted for, the confirmation she'd journaled about, the open door she cried over on bathroom floors and whispered for in her sleep. But here's what no one tells you about breakthroughs. They don't always come wrapped in applause. Sometimes they show up as assignments, uncomfortable, inconvenient, heavy with responsibility. The offer was legitimate, but so was the weight that came with it. A new city, a platform that would stretch her, a season that would require more oil than applause. There would be late nights, lonely moments, voices that questioned, who does she think she is? But the question wasn't about them anymore. The question was her own. Would she say yes to the place God had prepared? even if it meant leaving everything familiar behind. God had aligned the connections. He had whispered her name in rooms she'd never entered. He had sent someone with influence to confirm, not define, her calling. But this final move, this step, that was hers. She had to walk it out, one trembling step at a time. She finally opened the email. Read it once, then again, and as tears rolled down her cheeks, she whispered, "God, I'm scared." And he answered, not with thunder, but with the still, steady voice she'd come to know in the fire. "You're not going in alone. You're walking with me." That's when it clicked. The door wasn't just an invitation to impact. It was an invitation to intimacy. Not "go do this for me," but "let's do this together." She wasn't walking into a job. She was walking into a divine assignment. And so she stood, typed her reply, and with holy trembling in her hands, she hit send. The world didn't shift around her, but something shifted within her. She was no longer begging for permission. She was no longer waiting for a sign. She had become the sign, a living, breathing confirmation that God still calls, still equips, still leads. Even when the path is paved with quiet obedience and unseen sacrifice. And that's what it means, chosen one. Heaven may open the door, but only you can take the step. Don't let fear dress itself up as wisdom. Don't let the voice of the past chain you to hesitation. Don't miss your miracle because it didn't come with music. Sometimes the most sacred moments come silently. And when the door appears, walk. Because if God opened it, He already prepared you to carry what's on the other side. Part 7. This is bigger than you. She had finally stepped through the door. Not just figuratively, physically, emotionally, spiritually. She had said yes, and everything shifted. The offer was confirmed. The relocation had begun. The emails were signed. The schedule was full. But the real change was internal. She didn't feel bigger. She felt smaller, not insignificant, but humbled. Because when the divine door opens, you begin to see something you couldn't from the waiting room. This was never just about you. In the silence, God was forming a woman, but in the spotlight, He was launching a mission. Every journaled prayer, every fasted meal, every yes whispered through tears. They weren't just leading her to a platform. They were preparing her to carry others. What felt like delay wasn't punishment. It was God's mercy, so she wouldn't collapse under the weight of a calling too big for self-glory. She sat in the green room before her first major speaking engagement. Nervous, yes, but not afraid. On the table beside her sat her notes, neatly stacked, prayed over, soaked in scripture. But what she didn't see were the names attached to those words. Being people she didn't know yet. Faces she hadn't seen. Souls who would hear her voice and feel heaven echo. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Matthew 5:14. She had once begged God to notice her. Now, God was sending her to be noticed, not for fame, but for function. This was not about elevation. It was about assignment. In the crowd that night sat a mother who had just lost her son, a man who had contemplated suicide a week before, a girl who had been trafficked and told she had no value. And as she stepped onto the stage, it hit her. This is bigger than me. Her voice wasn't just hers anymore. It was an instrument in the hands of the one who had shaped it in silence. The story she almost silenced would now be someone else's salvation. She spoke, not loudly, but clearly, not trying to impress, but simply trying to obey. She talked about the wilderness, the hidden years, the ache of delay, the weight of being chosen, and the quiet trauma of obedience. And something broke in the room. Not emotionally, spiritually. People began weeping before she finished. Not because of eloquence, but because truth carries its own anointing. Your healing will become someone else's hope. That night, a woman messaged her, "I was going to give up tonight. But when you spoke, something inside me shifted. I don't know why, but I feel like I've been seen by God." And that's when she realized her platform was not for performance, it was for presence, so others could feel God's nearness through her obedience. The next day, she met with the man God had sent months ago, the one who saw her before the world clapped. He smiled as she shared the testimonies. You're not just stepping into rooms, you're pulling people out of caves. She paused, tears welled, because that had always been her cry. God, let me be light to the ones still trapped in dark. And he had answered, not with applause, but with impact. To whom much is given, much will be required. Luke 12:48. The doors kept opening. Podcasts, panels, interviews, but she no longer needed them to affirm her. She walked in knowing she carried something greater than words. A mantle, not given by man, not revocable by culture, divine stamp, branded in the wilderness, proven in prayer, tested in fire. But with every yes came weight. More people, more voices, more distractions. That's when God reminded her, this isn't about being everywhere. This is about going where I send you. So she pulled back, not in pride, in protection, of the oil, of the purity, of the mission. She began mentoring others quietly, not for show, for legacy, with women who had stories like hers, men who had mantles but no maps. She met them in coffee shops, through DMs, in prayer rooms. She didn't need a stage to make impact. She had become the very thing she used to pray for, a vessel. Your testimony becomes someone else's rescue rope. There was one girl who reminded her of herself, quiet, discerning, hidden behind oversized sweaters and a silent ache. They met after one of her talks. The girl said nothing, just hugged her and cried. Weeks later, she received a letter from her. You gave me permission to believe I wasn't crazy for hearing God in silence. You made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I was chosen too. She held the letter to her chest and whispered, God, this is enough. Even if it's just her, this is enough. And heaven whispered back, but it won't be just her. The ripples had begun. What she once called survival was now strategy. What once felt like punishment was now preparation. Every tear had watered the soil of someone else's miracle. And this is where you come in, chosen one. Because your yes won't just open your door, it will unlock rooms for others. Your elevation is not a prize. It's a pathway. You are called to multiply, not just finances or influence, but faith, hope, healing. You may never know every person your obedience will touch, but heaven is keeping score differently. The people watching your life, they won't always say it out loud, but they're being changed in silence. By your light, by your yes, by your refusal to quit. This is why you can't shrink back. This is why you must keep walking. Because what God has placed inside of you wasn't just for your freedom, it was for generational release. Your life is not just a testimony, it is a strategy, a living, breathing reminder that God still builds from ashes, that He still crowns with purpose, that He still uses the forgotten to lead the future. And if you ever doubt it, just look around. People are watching you rise, and somewhere someone is whispering to themselves, if she can rise, maybe I can too. Part 8. Live like heaven already said yes. She used to walk into rooms quietly, not just with humility, but with hidden hesitation. Would they approve? Would she be accepted? Was she enough? But something shifted after the door opened. Not in the world, but in her. She no longer entered to be chosen. She entered knowing she already was. She didn't become arrogant. She became anchored, not in applause, not in credentials, but in the holy confirmation that heaven had already said yes. And now she moved like it. Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. Isaiah 65:24. She rose in the morning with a new rhythm. not hustling for approval, but stewarding the assignment. She dressed like someone on a mission. She spoke like someone who had nothing to prove but everything to release. She prayed, not begging, but partnering. She knew the anointing wasn't just a feeling, it was a responsibility. Her days became deliberate. It's not perfect, not easy, but purposeful. She tithed like overflow was coming. She rested like warfare was already won. She invested like nations would be influenced. She forgave like freedom was more important than fairness. Because heaven had already whispered, yes. Now, walk it out. She stopped asking God if she was ready and started thanking him that she was refined. She no longer rehearsed her resume in her head. She rehearsed his promises. As when people questioned her presence in certain rooms, she didn't shrink. She smiled because she knew she was invited by heaven, not man. Your gift will make room for you and bring you before great men. Proverbs 18:16. And it was happening, not because she pushed, but because she positioned herself in faith. That's the kind of chosen one you're becoming. You won't need to announce it. You'll live it. You'll walk into meetings knowing the oil you carry shifts the atmosphere. You'll pray before calls, not out of fear, but out of preparation. You'll sow into others without wondering what's in it for you. You'll serve with joy because you're no longer building status, you're building legacy. And when doors open, you won't panic. You'll step through them like someone who's been expecting the yes. Because you have. All along, your obedience was declaring it. Yes, Lord, even when it hurts, even when it's hidden, even when it's hard. Heaven responded. And now it's your turn. Chosen one, live like heaven already said yes. Don't wait for the applause to activate your anointing. Don't delay your movement waiting for man's affirmation. Move, build, yourself, speak, rest, as if the promise is already manifesting, because in the spiritual realm, it is. Part 9. The oil, guard the flame. She had come too far to burn out now, not after the battles she survived, not after the breakthroughs she bled for, not after the door she finally walked through. But success has a strange sound. It doesn't roar like a lion. It whispers like a lullaby, inviting you to relax, settle, get comfortable. And that's where many lose their fire, not in failure, but in favor. So she did something radical. She protected the oil. She guarded her mornings. She limited her circle. She chose prayer over performance, silence over spectacle, because what God had poured into her was costly. She remembered the crushing, the pressing, the hidden years where all she had was a word and her wounds. Now that the light was on her, she refused to lose the intimacy she found in the dark. But the wise took oil in jars along with their lamps. Matthew 25:4. She understood what the 5 wise virgins knew. Oil can't be borrowed. It must be cultivated. And oil doesn't stay fresh in chaos. It needs stillness. It needs boundaries. It needs intentionality. So she made room, not just on her schedule, but in her soul. She turned down opportunities that didn't align. She refused platforms that prized visibility over virtue. She didn't explain her discernment, she obeyed it. Not every open door is divine. Not every invitation is an assignment. Some are traps dressed as favor, and she had learned the hard way that peace is often the greatest proof of purpose. People began to notice her glow, not because she shouted, but because she shined. She didn't hustle for God's attention anymore. She hosted his presence. And when people asked, "What's your secret?" she smiled and said, "I kept the oil. I guarded the flame." Chosen one, this is your now word. Don't trade your anointing for applause. Don't let busyness dilute your clarity. Don't let success replace surrender. Protect what God has placed in you, that flame, that foil, That holy hush that falls when you speak, pray, write, walk. It's sacred, it's powerful, it's heaven's mark on your life. And it must be protected, not just projected. The oil is not just for the mountaintop, it's for the trenches, for the rooms you'll be sent to next, for the generations that will eat from the fruit of your faithfulness.
So tend to the flame. Guard your heart. Watch your words. Feed your spirit. When the world runs, you don't carry average fire. You carry divine assignment. Guard the flame. And when the next season comes, you'll still be burning.
Part 10. Your yes will outlive you. She stood in front of a group of young women, eyes wide, notebooks open, hearts broken and burning at the same time. Some were fresh from betrayal. Some were holding dreams with shaking hands. Some still bore the silence of unanswered prayers in their chest. She looked at them and saw herself, not who she was now, but who she had been, before the door opened, before the oil flowed, before the help arrived. She cleared her throat, not to speak from strength, but to pour from surrender. I didn't always believe I was chosen, she said softly, but I believed God was, and that was enough. Her voice wasn't loud, but heaven had taught her. Volume isn't what breaks chains, obedience is. And her obedience was already echoing through generations, not because she had a stage, but because she had stayed faithful when it was silent, when it hurt, when she didn't know how the story would unfold. And now, young women were quoting words she once whispered through tears. Men were leading differently after hearing her testimony. Children were learning what it meant to walk in identity because their mothers watched her walk in hers. Eulogy commends your works to another. They tell of your mighty acts. Psalm 145:4. This wasn't just impact. This was imprint. The ripple of her yes was creating waves she'd never lived long enough to see break upon the shore, and she was okay with that. Because legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about planting something eternal. She remembered the words God had whispered to her in the darkest part of her life. What you walk through will become someone else's breakthrough. At the time, it felt cruel. Why should her suffering serve someone else's story? But now that she was free, now that she had seen resurrection power up close, she understood. It had never been about her comfort. It was always about her commission. Chosen one, hear me. God didn't bring you through that storm just so you could sit in the sunshine. He brought you through so others could see it's survivable. You're not just the evidence. You're the invitation. Every time you walk into a room, healed and whole, you are reminding the broken that it's possible, that redemption is not just poetic, it's practical, and you're living proof. There will be people who never tell you, messenger, never thank you, but they will change because of you. They'll watch the way you hold your head high. When lies try to bury your name, they'll study how you serve in silence. When others perform for applause, they'll watch you choose purity. In a world obsessed with platforms, and they will be moved, not to mimic you, but to meet the God who carried you. We are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Hebrews 12:1. Your yes is not just heard by earth, it's recorded in heaven, and the fruit of it, the lives changed, the cycles broken, the wounds healed, will outlive you. One day, someone will pick up your journal and find the exact words they needed to read. One day, a sermon you forgot you preached will resurrect a calling in a heart across the globe. One day, your child, your friend, your reader will face their own battle and remember what you did when the fire came, and they'll say, she didn't fold, she didn't faint, she didn't quit, so I won't either. That's legacy. So if you ever doubt that your obedience matters, look again. Look at the girl who started praying again because of your story. Look at the boy who saw you worship and felt a spark ignite. Look at the woman who left abuse after watching you walk in freedom. Look at the soul who almost gave up until they saw your scars and believed healing was real. You didn't need 1,000,000 followers. You needed one real yes. And heaven took it, broke it like bread, and began feeding nations. There's a woman named Hannah in the Bible. She prayed for a son. God gave her Samuel, but she didn't hoard him. She gave him back to the Lord. That single act of surrender, it shaped the future of Israel. Your yes works the same way. You may not always see what it becomes, but it will become something sacred. Every prayer you prayed, every boundary you kept, every apology you forgave without receiving, God bottled it all. Not one drop was wasted. Not one act of faithfulness ignored. You were building a house, not made with hands, but with honor. A house the next generation will dwell in. A house called legacy. There is a young woman who hasn't met you yet, but she's walking into her first spiritual battle, and your voice will be the armor she remembers. There is a son being raised in a broken home, but he'll meet someone you mentored, and they'll speak words that rewrite his life. That's the beauty of being chosen. You don't carry blessings, you carry blueprints. So keep going, keep showing up, keep sowing seeds even when you don't see the harvest. Because your yes, it's not small, it's eternal. Your yes will outlive your title. Your yes will outlast your timeline. Your yes will echo in places your feet never touch. Well done, good and faithful servant. Matthew 25:23. That's what you're building toward. Not applause, not platforms, but the voice of the Father, welcoming you home as the generations you touched walk in behind you. So rise again today, speak again, create again, love again, trust again, not because it's easy, but because someone's life depends on your yes. And one day they'll thank you, even if they never say a word. You are the miracle they prayed for. Chosen one. If you made it to the end of this message, you already know this wasn't just a video. This was a visitation. From the moment your spirit stirred, from the moment the tears welled up, and you whispered, "That's me." Heaven has been writing something eternal through you. You weren't overlooked. You were being aligned. You weren't rejected. You were being refined. And now, you're not just approaching the door. You are the door. For someone else's healing, someone else's deliverance, someone else's destiny. Your obedience was the strategy. Your scars became someone's safety net. Your silence trained your discernment, and your yes became a signal in the spirit that the mission is still alive. You've cried, you've waited, you've prayed when it didn't make sense. But look at you now, still chosen, still rising, still ready. So live like heaven already said yes, because it did. And now the world will see what God was building all along in secret. 1. Delays are not denials, they are divine developments. God was building roots when it looked like nothing was growing. 2. Heaven's help is often hidden until it's suddenly revealed. You weren't waiting on the help was being prepared for you. 3. You don't need credentials to carry the anointing. Your story, your scars, your obedience, those are your qualifications. 4. Not every open door is divine. Discernment matters more than opportunity. Protect the oil, guard your flame. 5. Your yes is generational. You're not just chosen to rise, you're chosen to raise others up through your story. This word confirmed what you already felt in your spirit. If you know you were the one heaven whispered to through this story, drop a comment below that says, "I'm walking through the door." Say it as a public agreement, not with me, but with heaven's assignment on your life. And if this story lit a fire in you, share it with someone who's still sitting in the shadows. You might be the very sign they've been praying for. Support the journey. If this ministry is feeding your spirit, If these messages are more than just content, but divine confirmation, then let God lead you in how to support it. Your gift is not payment. It's a partnership with purpose. Until next time, stay anchored, stay anointed, stay in position. The help is already on the way, and you're not waiting for favor. You are walking in it. God bless you. Still chosen, still covered, still rising.